I'll introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Dr. Susan Bennett. She was one of the first graduates of the forensic program at the University of Technology in Sydney, Australia. She went on to earn her PhD degree from the University of Technology. In March of 2003, she joined the new South Wales Police Force Forensic Services Group. Currently, in 2006, Dr. Bennett became the team leader of the Chemical Criminalistics Unit, and her paper today is entitled "The Holistic Approach to Textile Damage Examination."
So I work in our team, we call it the Chemical Criminalistics Unit. I've noticed since being here, that's not a phrase that's often used in this country. When we started our team up, we actually made the decision not to call it a trace evidence unit because we didn't want people to be confused and think we were doing trace DNA. We still do get requests to do trace DNA, even though it clearly says chemical in our title. And the other one, we didn't want to call our unit physical evidence either because in our state, crime scene actually works in two branches. There's a physical evidence branch and then there's a fingerprint branch. So we also didn't want to confuse people and think that basically we were just another crime scene unit. So we come under a chemistry section of what we've called the Forensic Science Services branch, which comes under the Forensic Services Group of the New South Wales Police Force. So we've got quite a detailed organisational structure, I suppose. Now, if I look familiar, I was here at the conference 2 years ago where I presented a fibre transfer case study from a murder case we had. And in this presentation as well, I'll do a couple of case studies. There are also some murder cases from Sydney. Please don't let that put you off if you've always wanted to come and visit us. It is a lovely country to come and visit. It does take an incredibly long time to fly there. I will warn you, it took us something like 28 hours to get here from Sydney. So if you do come for a while, come and stay for a bit. And at the end of the presentation, I'll actually hopefully give you a couple of reasons to come and visit us. But basically, Australia is a country that has a population of about 21 million people. It's broken up into a number of states, and New South Wales is just one of them. I think at our last census, the population of New South Wales is just over 7 million people. And then the rest of the population spread around the other states. Each state has its own police force, or police service, or police, whichever way they like to call it. In New South Wales, we like to be a force because we're tough on crime. And we also have a federal police force as well. So we're quite a bit more complicated than New Zealand, where they have the one police force and the one forensic science provider. But the reason I became interested in what would be the best way to approach textile damage examinations was last year we actually had a workshop in Australia where we brought together all the state labs to just spend a week workshopping textile damage and how we could improve it, how we could develop uniform training across all the states and how we could possibly try and do it better, because there are quite a few cases where textile damage is probably not the most critical part of the case, but where it has answered a question nothing else could answer, so it is still quite important. And I always thought in my own mind that textile damage always fits under the fibre discipline. I mean, to me a fibre examination is anything from a single fibre to a whole garment and anything in between. I thought that was obvious. But when we had this workshop, we actually found there's only 2 forensic labs in our country that textile damage is done by trace evidence labs or criminalistics labs. Everywhere else it's actually done by the biology section or by crime scene, which I thought was quite odd that it's so different in so many different states when we're such a small country, but it seems to be, it's just kind of ended up in the section where the person happens to be who had that one case where it was useful and they had to do a little bit more with it, and then they've developed an interest in it, and then that's just where it's ended up. So it seems to be more by accident than by design, which then made it quite interesting when we were trying to discuss what's the best way to train people in this, what kind of qualifications or background knowledge would you expect from someone who should be able to do this kind of examination. In the end, we found we couldn't agree, because the biologists thought really it should be with them. They get the clothing first. It's mainly to do with sexual assaults. That's what they work on. The crime scene people thought it should be with them because it becomes part of their whole examination, and then there were only 2 of us who really thought it should be with chemical criminalistics or physical evidence, and we never actually came to any agreement. So I'll just, out of interest, ask everybody here if, from your own labs and your own states, whether you think or have textile damage under either a chemistry discipline or is it under a biology discipline? So who here in their lab is it textile damage done by, say, your trace evidence section? So I should move here probably. And who here where textile damage is actually done by your biology section? Only a few. I am in the wrong country. Is there anyone where it's crime scene do it? Only a very few. Well, I thought, yeah, that was quite interesting. Okay, so there's still a little bit of disagreement here, but not much. So I'm just going to do a few case studies we've had in New South Wales that I thought were quite interesting, and then at the end very briefly explain how it is we're going to try and approach it, because we have decided to keep it under chemical criminalistics. It's a part of the FIBRE training manual and procedure manual, or we've actually called them examination guidelines. But that still doesn't really address the problem that biology do usually get the clothing first. They do usually tend to get the knives or weapons first. So we're going to try a few things in our state to try and address that. So here's our first case study. An elderly couple were reported missing by a relative from England. They'd actually moved out to a suburb of Sydney from England. They were living there with their daughter. They were in around their early 70s. And there was a relative from England, or a couple of the relatives in England had been told that this couple had died. But one of the relatives was quite concerned about this. They thought it was odd that there was no notice or record of that death anywhere. They were, I think, probably also a bit offended that they never were invited to any funeral or anything formal had ever happened. So they actually, all the way from England, rang the police in Sydney and reported what we call a concern for welfare, where they basically rang and said, look, we've been told they've died, but we've not seen any death notice in any of the papers. Now with the internet you can. Tried to find, and there's no record of their death. So they went around and visited the house and spoke to the neighbours, and they said, oh, no, they haven't lived here for quite a while. They moved back to England. And the daughter said the same thing. Oh, no, they've moved back to England. They're fine, but I can get their contact details if you like. So they thought that was a bit suspicious. And then so they just asked if they could just have a look around the house quickly, and then noticed, I don't know if the space under the house, there's air vents underneath to help ventilation. As they walked around the house, they noticed these had all been blocked up with silicone, which again they thought was rather odd. So they had a look under the house and found the remains of a male and a female. From the autopsy, they found the male, and it was confirmed by DNA that it was the father, had died from blunt force trauma to the head. And the female skeleton was confirmed to be the mother. However, the cause of death they could not, or said they were unable to determine, which, as you'll see, I think is probably quite odd. Because we then got the nightgown. I thought it was in pretty good condition considering it's cotton polyester nightgown that someone just completely decomposed in. But on the back right-hand side of this nightgown, there were multiple stab cuts. Some of them even had, at one end of the cut, the little Y notch and then a little curve at the other, indicating a single-edged knife. And then there was an area where there was a mixture of cuts and tears altogether. So there were quite a lot of stab cuts in total. And in that one area, there must have been quite a few and been, I would say, quite frenzied to cause that much damage. I thought that was quite surprising to see that many stab cuts in that area not actually have anything left on the skeleton to be able to show that as well, but apparently there wasn't. I'm not a pathologist or an anthropologist to explain why that is. And the other thing that was interesting is down, You probably can't see it here. Unfortunately, I couldn't put the really good photos in because the file size was too big and it just froze the computer and nothing happened. At the back of the nightgown, there were 2 tears up either side, and that fabric across the bottom there was actually all bunched up when we got it. So what we think, well, obviously, because people don't normally go to sleep underneath their house, it looks like she actually murdered her parents probably in the kitchen and hallway of the house and then dragged them underneath, and that's what we think has torn the bottom of the nightgown and bunched it all up. And we think because she was laying on her back, that somehow protected where all this damage is, so that's why there was no real insect or scavenger damage. Normally if you get, or we get remains wherever they've been injured is of course where that scavengers attack first, and they tend to just eat anything, including the clothing on top. But we did think it was rather odd that the neighbours, because this is not a country town, it's a suburb of Sydney where their houses are quite close together. We did think it rather odd that the neighbours didn't notice anything suspicious happening. I would have thought somebody sealing up the vents under their house would be a bit strange, to say the least. And then this is another case. I don't know if people here, do you have fly screens on windows? We actually get a lot of requests for examining fly screens because someone in summer's left their window open, intruders slash the fly screen to gain entry, and they of course always want to know, well, can you tell us what's cut the fly screen? Fly screens are quite difficult, well I think they're quite difficult to actually interpret much from. But in this case, a 2-year-old girl went missing from her bedroom. She shared this bedroom with 3 sisters. They were all in there in the one room together. Fly screen was cut on 3 sides, so down bottom half of the right-hand side, across the bottom, and then down the left. And the parents alleged that somebody must have leant in the window because the bed was right underneath the window, picked her out of the bed and taken her away. To start with, the investigators were quite suspicious of the father. They think he, as investigators do, tend to form an opinion and then look for things that support that. They think what had happened is the child had probably died of SIDS or something else had happened. They'd staged an abduction because you can then claim victim compensation in New South Wales. These are quite experienced detectives, so I'm sure are very cynical and probably a bit biased because of that. They actually hired a human movement expert from a university to come and examine the damage of the fly screen and say whether he thought it had been cut from inside the house or outside the house, and they paid this person about $15,000 to in the end say, oh, it could be either, but it's probably a right-handed person and about this tall, and if you lifted him, probably male and all those things. So we had a look at the fly screen, and really they could have saved their money because there were 2. The very first cut that was made was very neat and right against the frame, and then was cut along the bottom, and you can see it was very neat to start with and then started to curve up as the fly screen probably started to lose tension. And then the third cut, there was actually one cut, and then whatever tool had been used had sort of skipped across and kept going. So we focused on those ends in the corner, and at that cut where it only cut and not all the way to the bottom, we actually found one intersection where it was only a partial cut, had only cut through one of the threads and not all the way through, and that was from the outside. So clearly the investigators' theory that the father or parents had cut the fly screen from the inside to basically commit fraud was actually wrong. And the other thing that was quite interesting, they seemed to think fly screens were quite difficult to cut. It must have taken the person a long time if they'd... This story doesn't make much sense because they would have had to stand there for ages to do all of this. So we actually went to the house and did some simulation reconstructions. And seeing as it took about 10 minutes to slash about 10 fly screens, they very quickly realised that they weren't correct in that assumption. But it was interesting too, because then of course they went down the track, well, can you tell us what sort of tool was used? And surely it must have been an incredibly sharp knife, someone would have seen something like that. But we used a variety of different tools and they all cut the fly screen really quickly and really didn't leave anything distinctive to be able to say. But I like this one because it was a fly screen we were actually able to say something. Normally you get fly screens and you kind of, it's cut. and that's about it. Actually, and this is another fly screen one. Two men were having an argument. One of these men was armed with a gun. The victim actually, to get away from him, ran back inside his house and shut the security door. So this was one of those ones with a diamond grill and then a fly screen on it. And then the suspect shot the victim through the security door and killed him. And then somehow managed to argue that it was an accidental shooting. How you accidentally shoot someone through a door, I'm not entirely sure, but apparently they had a convincing argument. So in this, the fly screen was removed from the door. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of it at the scene in situ. They've removed the screen and brought the whole screen in. So what investigators wanted to know was whether that round hole was there first and then the tear, or whether the tear was there first and then the hole. Because the suspect's argument was they were having a fight. He had chased after him and was quite angry, had actually pushed the firearm through a tear in the fly screen that was there already, and the victim struggled with the firearm on the other side, and in that struggle the firearm accidentally discharged. Unfortunately for this one, we weren't allowed to cut the fly screen up. What I really wanted to do was cut that and put it on our XRF and map for lead and see what else was interesting, but we weren't allowed to cut it up. But we did some simulations and found that if you shot a fly screen and actually pushed the muzzle of the gun straight through, it looked pretty much exactly like that. And we couldn't really reconstruct that doing it the other way around. So in the end, I thought that the hole was probably there first and then a larger object has been pushed through afterwards to create the tear. What the time difference is there is no way to know. The only thing I thought was interesting is that square kind of deformed area. I have really not got any idea as to what would have caused that. It doesn't line up with the diamonds in the security door that it sat on. That's what I first thought, was maybe it distorted around that, but it didn't line up. So I would have actually liked a bit more time with this one. It was one of those ones that's done, oh, we found out what the defendant's going to argue, quick, find someone to have a look at it and see if that's possible or not. So there was a bit of a short time frame and not being allowed to cut it up. We also get quite a few, cases that involve textile damage where there's not been a stabbing or anything cutting involved. It's not just whether a textile's been cut or torn. There can also be insect and animal damage, but there can also be effect of corrosive and flammable liquids. Sounds really bad. We've had quite a few assaults involving acids and bases and flammable liquids. This doesn't usually happen to tourists, so please. It's usually, all these cases, the person knew who was attacking them, so it was all... Just make sure you don't know anyone too violent in our country. But we actually include an examination of the damage to the clothing as part of trying to identify what the liquid is. So the jacket on your left, that's actually from an assault where the suspect threw incredibly concentrated nitric acid at the victim, and started probably at that right shoulder, and then you can actually even see the paw pattern where they've thrown it at them. And then the one on the other side is actually an assault where they used concentrated sodium hydroxide, caustic soda. Given the amount of damage these two caused to these poor people, the investigators were quite concerned how easily available these things are. They were convinced, particularly with the sodium hydroxide one, that this must be something incredibly rare and dangerous. And when we said, well, it's caustic soda, you can buy it from any hardware store, it's what you use pretty much to clean your drains out. You'll have some in your own house if you go home and look. They thought that was a little bit concerning. But we thought it was just interesting that the acid on the fabric had actually caused quite a lot of change to the dye there and actually melted it in section, whereas the caustic soda didn't really actually damage the fabric much at all, but did cause quite severe injuries to the person wearing it. And we've actually had a few cases where people have thrown a product shellite at a person, then lit it, and it's caused quite distinctive sort of strips of melting on their clothing, which apparently we found a journal article looking at the effect of vapour cloud explosions on fabric and found the damage was pretty similar to what they reported in that article. So that's the one we like to use to show, well, textile damage isn't just to do with biology. You can use anything as a weapon, and who knows, it can cover a lot of different things. The only problem we're finding is demonstrated by this case is, yeah, as soon as most cases someone's been stabbed, everything gets sent for DNA. And usually what happens is they've sent it for DNA even before they've spoken to you. And then in our state, the DNA examination profiling is actually done by a separate lab, which is actually even under a separate government department. So we have quite a few, well, a lot of problems actually getting any information out of them as to what they've done. So particularly for specific cases, if we need to know how they've examined something, what they've done, we actually have to subpoena their case notes to find out. Yeah, that really annoys me too. It's part of the one thing to me. It shouldn't be that hard. But in this one, yeah, the victim had been fatally stabbed. Luckily, crime scene looked at the weapon first and recovered a number of clumps of red fibres from the blade. It was a serrated knife. They always work really good for this. So they'd submitted them for a fibre comparison. We just said, well, if you send us the weapon as well, we can do it all together. So that's what we prefer to do, is have the fibre comparison and the textile damage all in the one examination, and then we form the one opinion on all of that. But of course, yeah, the knife had been sent for DNA. And I said, oh, well, once they're finished, you could send it to us and we can still do that. But I still have not seen it. It's probably lost in their backlog somewhere. Probably never to be seen again. But basically, there. I also thought this case was interesting because usually if you have, I suppose it's probably because the person was dead, they didn't, but usually you have two, someone's got a single stab wound or a couple of stab wounds and the ambulance officers turn up. It's always where they've been stabbed is exactly where they cut, which makes things quite difficult sometimes. But this one, it would have been good if we could have gotten, or at least seen, the actual knife used, so then we could have actually done a few simulations and just put it all together. So that kind of highlighted to us that yes, although we are of the opinion we should be doing this, we need to make sure other units that may possibly get items before us, crime scene who often recommend to investigators what can be done, we need to make sure they know that as well. That they know it's possible and they know what we require and that they make sure we do get it. So now what we did, we actually had, so in our branch we actually now have our own biology section to triage cases, because in Australia in biology there's been quite a few labs have realised that biology did exist before DNA. They did used to do other things, and they're starting to realise that maybe those other things they used to do are still useful and they're able to answer questions that DNA can't. So they're trying to become more like biological criminalistics and think of other issues like blood spatter, and textile damage is one of them. So back in our lab we had a little discussion about where this would best fit, because of course the biology unit that was set up thought it was best with them because for all the reasons that's happened in most states in our country. But in the end we actually was decided that it will stay with us because we were able to be more holistic in our approach. We found certain phrases with our management work quite well. Holistic is one of them. Flyaway capability and mobile lab are another. But what we're doing to make sure that we don't miss all those cases is that we've actually got a training program for crime scene first. We start with crime scene because they're the ones who go to the scene and they're the ones who give the most information and can, in our state, they didn't decide where exhibits go. So we have crime scene and they're not trained to do textile damage. They are trained to some extent to be able to tell whether something's cut or a tear, but nothing more than that. The point of theirs is to be able to assess cases as to which ones textile damage may be useful, and those cases where really what the investigators want is really just for completeness. So those cases the person's been stabbed 15 times, the post-mortem says they've been stabbed 15 times, there really is no point examining the t-shirt they were wearing to make sure they're cuts and not tears. they're able to sort of triage those cases. And what we're starting to do is train our biology staff, because the point of their unit is to have those cases with a multidisciplinary, or required for a multidisciplinary examination, are meant to come to them. So we really need them to know what's possible and what's not, and then what we need to be able to do anything. So we're doing the same thing with them now, where we're calling it like a textile damage level 1. So they're trained and then authorised to do a preliminary assessment and assess the case, but they're not then trained in textile damage, if that makes sense. We've only just started, so I'm not entirely sure how well this will work. The problem with training people in these things, we found when we did the workshops with them, the first thing they said was, wow, what you guys do is so cool, I wish I could do that. And that's kind of our concern. We don't want them to do it we just want them to assess the case and send it to us so we can put it with everything else. But then it's also been quite good training them, because the next thing they do is say, oh my goodness, I didn't realise how much was involved in what you guys do. We thought you just tested things. You just ran them on a GCMS and said it's this, and that's pretty much all you do. So we found it's also been quite good to make sure they're aware of just how broad our discipline is, how many things it covers, just what is potentially out there, so that if they are involved in a case or they go to a major crime review and we haven't been invited, they're at least able to let investigators or whoever's there know what else might possibly be possible, what else may be possible. So we've only just started this. We're not entirely sure it will work, but we're going to give it a go. And I guess you'll just have to contact me and I'll let you know how it works. And I was saying earlier, give you a couple of extra reasons if you want to come and visit Sydney. At the moment in our team, we have 2 vacant positions. We actually did put up to advertise our positions in New Scientist, but due to the current economic climate, it was decided it cost too much, so I'm taking this opportunity to let as many people know as possible, seeing as we can't advertise in New Scientist. We are, however, able to take international applicants, and would be on the basis of a 4-year work visa. And if anybody's interested, I actually have position descriptions and business cards if you would like. And if any managers here are concerned, this is not headhunting, because I'm telling a large number of people all at once and there's only 2 positions. I should also point out that our lab doesn't have a view of Sydney Harbour. We're actually in the western suburbs of Sydney, but Sydney is quite a nice place to live. And another reason to come to Sydney, oh, it's not there. We're also having a conference next year. The Australian and New Zealand Forensic Science Society International Symposium on the Forensic Sciences will be held in September in Sydney. There are flyers on the information table out there. Claude will have a slide up on his presentation tomorrow, which I was meant to have on mine but didn't quite work. The theme of the conference is Forensic Science on Trial, so it would be quite interesting if we had some people from different countries to give their perspective on that. So there's a website we can get lots of information, it can be emailed. I'm one of the chairs of we're calling it Chemical Criminalistics, so if you log on you're not sure what section you should submit your abstract under, that's the one. And we're going to try and have as many people from as many different countries as possible and really have a focus on more case studies and actual cases that have gone to court rather than research and theory. With that as well, but we really want to make it a real practitioners conference. And it's a really good conference to come to because we actually do all our forensic disciplines together in the one. So if you want to one day, there's nothing interesting in our session, you can sit in on a pathologist session on some of their case studies or toxicology or crime scene or DNA. The DNA one's really boring, I probably wouldn't do that one. But it is good because we run them all together, we run them concurrently, so you can chop and change and come in and out of different sessions and actually get some idea of what research is going on in other fields, which may or may not be of interest. Sometimes may possibly be applicable to your work. So, yes, if you have a couple of reasons there to come and visit us. Any questions? Or are we doing questions at the end? Or
do we have any questions? Yes.
Question on the screen, the fly screen cutting. Did you examine any knives in the house to determine if there are any fibers from the screen on a knife inside the house?
No. Our fly screens are made of fiberglass, coated with PVC. But no, we didn't get any knives from the house to compare. Because we found lots of different tools pretty much left the same features. None of them had anything transferred to them. We were thinking maybe if, because it was quite an old fly screen, so squares of PVC had actually come off. We were hoping maybe some of them may have transferred, but they fell off pretty quickly if they did.
Okay. We actually had a case in our laboratory years ago, the exact same scenario, where we found the fiberglass, the rubber-coated fiberglass fibers on a knife in the butcher block in the kitchen of the house. Very significant evidence.
Yes, that would be, because you wouldn't cut much with a kitchen knife that has fiberglass in it.
Yeah, Doug Orr from RCP in Edmonton. It's interesting what you're going through right now because historically textile damage in our facilities have always been done by the fiber people, which is part of our trace evidence section, which used to be called Canada years ago. But anyway, for several reasons, mainly because there's a lot of instances when we do fabric examinations and fiber comparisons, the actual textile damage comes into play. And in the last 3 months, I've actually done 2 cases where I've had button comparisons where the final conclusions also included textile damage, and it figured significantly in the final conclusions. Over the past 5 years, textile damage has been punted back and forth. In our system, we established what was called an evidence recovery unit, and it existed in the biology section. So the philosophy was, okay, we're going to open the exhibit once. Since the biologists get it first, if it's clothing, then they're going to do the textile damage. Well, with the crunch of resources over the last few years, they felt textile damage was a waste of their time. They wanted to focus all their time on DNA, so they punted it back to us, which we were happy about because I still feel textile damage should be done by fiber examiners and fabric examiners. The challenge we're having now is what you were saying, is training the biologists to actually process or actually assess a case. And the resistance we're getting right now is because we're accredited through ISO. And with that accreditation, their concern is their people aren't being proficiency tested like we are, and they're afraid of having anything to do with case assessment without those proficiency testing requirements. So it's not an easy issue to assess, especially if you're an accredited laboratory. Do your people have any concerns about that as far as accreditation goes?
We're accredited to the same ISO 17025, but we're audited by an organisation called NATA, and they actually came through a couple of weeks ago. Proficiency testing in our discipline is always an issue and comes up with every audit with pretty much every lab in the whole country, and they have just recognised it's not practical. Initially they did have a proposal that we should do a proficiency test in every single possible examination your unit may do, and they started writing them down and came to about 28. It's just not practical to have an examiner do 28 proficiency tests in a year, and a lot of them are very difficult to set up, like textile damage is one. Part of that workshop we had last year was looking at that, and so what we've decided to do is set up what we're calling it a collaborative trial, because it's not really a proficiency test, because the problem is, how do you simulate, say, a scenario? Because even if you do the practice yourself, you can think you've, say, stabbed something the exact same way multiple times and it will look different each time. So being able to even create a proficiency test where you know they're being tested the same and having it all standardised is quite difficult. Really, all we've done is made an internal one with just pieces of fabric and just had, because they're trained to assess cases, it's just there's some that have got tears, some have got cuts. We know how we've caused them, we just give it to them and say, all you to say is if you think it's cut or torn, and then that's assessed, and that's all we do.
Any other questions? Thank you, Dr. Bennett.